Thank you very much indeed for making me your guest this afternoon at this wonderful event, and also for asking me to say a few words, first to welcome you here, as well as thanking you. And I thought first I would just say a few words about the House of Lords itself, and then I wanted to say a few words about you and about entrepreneurship. I mean, the Arab, where we are, it's all written here, isn't it, you see? The Arab Entrepreneurs Board. Do we really understand what an entrepreneur is? Do politicians understand what entrepreneurs do? Do we value entrepreneurs enough? Those are the questions I want to ask. But first, a few words about the House of Lords. This is obviously an old building. It was built in around the 1850s. It could do with some restoration and renewal in parts of it, but it's an old and beautiful building. Fundamentally, it's an office block. There's 1,001 offices were contained in this building. That was the ambition. But of course, that's all upstairs. That's all hidden away. And the sort of great floor, the great chamber of the House of Commons and the House of Lords and all of that you see on the main floor are amongst the greatest achievements of Victorian Gothic architecture. And then there are rooms like this that are supportive and ancillary to those functions. But it is fundamentally, of course, a place of work. As I say, it's an old building. It was built in the 1850s. But the House of Lords is very, very much older. The House of Lords goes back to the Middle Ages. And it goes back to the principle of a monarch who has power, has the executive power, but of course wouldn't act or shouldn't act without the advice and the consent, or at least listening to the great lords, the great figures of the land. So yes, you can be the king, but you need to take people with you. You need to take the important people with you. That was always the principle. The problems we had in our medieval history and even in the 17th century always arose from kings who decided they didn't need to take the great lords along with them. They could act in despite of them. That always resulted in wars and difficulties. But that's the principle that the House of Lords grew from. And of course its membership was hereditary. If your father had been a member of the House of Lords, then it descended to the next generation. And that continued as the principle of composition of the House of Lords until the 1950s, when life peers were added to it. So people appointed as a member of the House of Lords, but only for life. The peerage would not be inherited by their eldest son. It would finish with their life. And they started to be added in sort of smallish numbers originally. But then Labour removed nearly all the hereditary peers 25 years ago, and they're now trying to remove the remaining 100 or so hereditary peers that we have left in the House of Lords. And so we've moved over a period of 70 years from a house that was entirely hereditary to a house that is almost entirely appointed. And my personal view is that being an appointed house has no legitimacy at all, actually. There's a very strong case for saying we should be an elected house, but nobody seems to want to take that on. So we're having all those arguments just at the moment about what sort of house we should be. What do? We spend an great amount of time scrutinizing legislation, nearly all of which comes from the government, of course. It's nearly all government legislation. Scrutinizing legislation in great detail. This is a job the House of Commons used to do in the past, but no longer really do, because they give very short windows of debate on each particular piece of legislation, so there isn't the chance to look at it in great detail. And we do all of that work, and it can take days going through a particular government bill, and we do it in the chamber. We have a wonderful freedom that we have nobody telling us what to do. So if we want to speak, anyone can speak. If you want to speak again, usually you can speak again. and so on. So there's great freedom of debate in the House of Lords, and it would be a great pity, I think, to lose that. But we're not, therefore, a model that other countries should necessarily follow, but because how can you say to people you should have an appointed legislature in a modern age, in a democratic age? So we're not necessarily a model for other people to follow. But I think we do what we do quite well, and we do it with a great sense of sincerity and public service here amongst nearly all of my colleagues. I wanted to talk also a little bit about entrepreneurship, because I think politicians have completely forgotten what entrepreneurs do. And they talk all the time about investment. Governments want to see, we want to attract foreign investment. We want more investment in our country. That is the means to growth, they say. But they don't want investment. This is a perversion of language. They don't really want investment in the old sense, the entrepreneurial sense of companies, people coming and setting up companies, and some of those companies might succeed and some might fail, some grow into being very large companies. That's what entrepreneurship involves. It involves risk. Not every entrepreneur is successful. Of course, that's everyone knows that. When you set out on the course of being an entrepreneur, you know you might not succeed, but very often you will, and you bring great wealth, genuine wealth, to the country, the whole country, not just to yourself, as a result of doing that. And the productivity improvements and so forth, this is all adding to the country's wealth. But what most politicians mean nowadays is, when they say we want investment, is that they mean we would like some foreign person to pay for a government project that we can't afford. Whether that government project is building windmills or building railways. Nearly all of these projects, by the way, are guaranteed to lose money. So they're not actually going to add to the wealth of the nation. They might be necessary, but in themselves they're not going to make any money. And so how can we get foreign people to do this? Well, the only way is for the taxpayer to give them some sort of guaranteed return. Well, you might as well borrow the money in that case. That's essentially, it's really just a form of borrowing. And so they use the language of business and they talk about investment, but it's not entrepreneurial investment in the way that you and I understand it. And I've had my own business in the past, in the way in which we have lived it. We have lived entrepreneurship. And so that's why I think it's really important that an organisation like the Arab Entrepreneurs Board exists, because entrepreneurs have to fight for airtime. You have to push yourselves forward as an organisation and say, we really matter. When you're making decisions, when you politicians are making decisions about the economy, when you're making decisions about taxes, when you're making decisions about regulations, remember that the real wealth being generated in this country is coming from us and people like us. People who put give their own lives in many ways to creating something which is profitable. Don't be anti-profit. People who invest their own money or get other people to invest their money, taking a risk in doing so. These people are the lifeblood of the prosperity of the nation and the future of the nation. And you're present here in this room. You deserve applause. You deserve our gratitude for what you do. But as I say, you also need to stand up for yourselves. You need to make your voice heard, because politicians, many of whom really have no idea what business is like, politicians forget you, and in doing so, they are forgetting the real future and the real prosperity of this country. Don't let them forget you. Well done. Keep making your case. And thank you very much. I'm keeping you now from your tea, so I'm going to stop. But you're very, very important to us all, and thank you for what you do.